Good morning. It's Monday, February 10th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 493 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. A quick shout out to the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. The Eagles are the Super Bowl champs, and as a son of Philadelphia, I couldn't be more proud. I wish I could say I followed this season as closely as I have in years past, but there's a war going on that has pulled my attention overseas. So enough about football. Let's get down to business. The hostage families in Israel are now calling for all of the remaining hostages to be released at once after Or Levy, Ohad Ben Ami, and Eli Sharabi came back from their time in captivity looking emaciated and weak. And they're not the only ones. Donald Trump said that the freed hostages look like Holocaust survivors, and he's not wrong. The president also said that at some point America could lose its patience. I'm assuming that was directed at Hamas, but perhaps also Iran, Qatar, Turkey, and Hamas's other enablers. I'm all in favor of U.S. pressure to end this crisis once and for all, and it certainly does not look like this administration is messing around. Today's guest is Josh Hammer, a prominent political commentator and analyst who currently serves as senior editor-at-large for Newsweek. He is the host of The Josh Hammer Show and the America on Trial podcast, which provides in-depth analysis on the most pressing legal issues facing our country. In addition, Josh is the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. We're going to talk to Josh momentarily about the U.S.-Israel relationship, the feasibility of Trump's vision for Gaza Lago, and more. So hang tight for that. Now, the Israeli Air Force bombed several targets yesterday in Lebanon, including rocket launchers, weapons caches, and a smuggling tunnel on the Syrian border. This comes one day after Lebanon formed its first legitimate government in 3 years. Lebanese activists and politicians tell me that this government is pragmatic and moderate. But here's the thing. The president, Joseph Aoun, is the former head of the Lebanese armed forces, which did nothing to inhibit Hezbollah for decades. The new prime minister, Nawaf Salam, was president of the International Court of Justice when the ICJ began to prosecute Israel for the crime of defending itself. This government also includes at least 4 members from Hezbollah's allies in the Amal party. So don't tell me this is a good government. The only positive thing we might say is that after years of Hezbollah's stranglehold on Lebanon, there may be political will to alter the status quo. But even if Lebanon is finally on the right track, we won't see change right away. These things take time, months, if not years. That timetable won't sit well with Israel's detractors. But until Lebanon begins to implement the changes that activists say are coming, Israel has to keep watching Hezbollah like a hawk. More to the point, Israel has to keep hammering the terrorist group that only months ago was Iran's most powerful proxy in the Middle East. Because if there's one thing we've learned since October 7th, it's that threats don't just go away on their own. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Israeli negotiators are back in Doha. They flew to Qatar Saturday night. The delegation included Israel's hostage point man Gal Hirsch and a senior Shin Bet official, as well as additional representatives from the Mossad and the IDF. But here's the thing. These guys don't have a mandate from the government to negotiate the second phase of the ceasefire deal. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just returned to Israel yesterday after 6 days in the U.S. He's expected to convene a security cabinet meeting, after which second phase negotiations can reportedly start in earnest 1 week after phase 2 talks were supposed to begin. In the meantime, the team in Doha is reportedly addressing technical details of the current ceasefire and hostage agreement. Netanyahu's office released a statement on Saturday explaining that the prime minister gave the delegation the directive to ensure that all hostages return. Headline 2, the IDF pulled out of the Netzarim corridor on Saturday night and Sunday morning. Netzarim bisects Gaza from east to west. 2 weeks ago, Israeli troops partially withdrew from Netzarim, allowing Palestinians to return to northern Gaza. The IDF was set to withdraw completely from the corridor on day 21 of the ceasefire. That was over the weekend. The IDF stopped short of formally confirming its withdrawal, but said it was continuing to implement the terms of the deal. There are still checkpoints at Netzarim, but they're run by the Egyptians and the Qataris in partnership with private American security contractors. Journalists from CNN and Agence France Presse who were at the crossing reported seeing Palestinians traveling north-south by car, bus, pickup truck, and even donkey. I personally don't think Israel should leave Netzarim. It's going to let Hamas get up off its back. but this was apparently the only way a hostage deal was going to happen. Headline 3, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei welcomed a senior Hamas delegation to Tehran. Khalil al-Hayya was there. He's the acting leader of Hamas, as was the head of Hamas's Leadership Council, Mohammad Darwish, and a senior member of Hamas's Politburo named Nizar Awadallah. According to Iranian TV, the terror chiefs were in Tehran to congratulate the supreme leader on the anniversary of the 1979 Iranian Revolution that swept this regime to power. The Hamasniks gave Khamenei an update on Gaza. Of course, they told Khamenei that they've achieved a great victory. Iranian TV quoted al-Hayya as telling Khamenei that he came to Tehran bursting with pride. Bursting sounds about right to me. Khamenei reassured the Hamas delegation that American threats won't impact Tehran's policies. Oh, and Khamenei posted a thank you on X to Hamas's negotiators for securing the current ceasefire. That was a hat tip to our so-called allies in Qatar. All right, it's now time for my interview with Josh Hammer of Newsweek. He's got a lot to say about the politics of the Middle East and America. He's got a new book on Israel and the future of Western civilization. I published a bunch of pieces with Josh when he was handling op-eds at Newsweek, and I've appeared on his radio show. So now I get to return the favor. Always fun when life comes full circle like this. So let's welcome Josh to the show. Welcome to the program, Josh Hammer.
Jonathan, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, great to have you. All right, let's start with Donald Trump. I know you've been a supporter of the president. How do you think his second term is shaping up so far? What are the positives and the negatives? Let's be honest here on both.
Yeah, look, I'll try to stick to Middle East foreign policy and national security issues because I generally do cover the full gamut here. I'm generally quite happy with what I see. I mean, I guess I'll start with some of the things that I'm disappointed by because, I think you typically hear conservative-leaning commentators focus less on those. So I guess I'll first highlight some areas where I've been a little let down. I'm not a fan of the whole flip on TikTok. That is one issue that I think has very relevant national security implications. I think Donald Trump was correct on TikTok the first time. He took a very strong stance against TikTok in the final year of his first term back in 2020. Sought to ban it. I'm not entirely sure exactly where this 180-degree flip is coming from. Now, it's good that he's seeking an American purchaser to try to acquire it from ByteDance. However, that's only half the problem. That's the national security half the problem. But TikTok is also a highly addictive form of really modern day drug for many teenagers there. So I have serious concerns about that. Then kind of getting into the Middle East stuff, I'm very happy for the most part, Jonathan, but I guess just focusing on the parts that I'm less happy with. You mentioned Qatar a little bit there in your opening remarks there. I'm not a fan of a lot of what I've heard from Steve Witkoff when it comes to Qatar. I mean, going on Fox News and praising the Emir Al-Thani for doing God's work. That's not necessarily what I signed up for. I've been quite publicly critical of that, actually. I'm on my radio show as well. So I'm not entirely sure exactly what to make of Steve Witkoff. He's done a lot of business with Qatar in the past. He sold that hotel back in 2023 for over $500 million to the Qatari government. I don't want to imply that he has bought and paid for it. Perhaps it's just ignorance there rather than outright malice. But whatever it is, I have some concerns there. But those are really just the concerns. There is much more that I'm deeply pleased about there. I mean, certainly what's happened over the past couple of weeks there, this trip from Prime Minister Netanyahu to Israel there, this really just over-the-top enthusiastic welcome that he received from Donald Trump, from Vice President Vance, from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth there. Jonathan, I have every expectation that this is going to be the warmest, probably the single warmest relationship that an American president and an Israeli prime minister have probably ever had. I think we saw that clearly over this past week or so there, and I'm deeply excited to see what these two men can do together. And then just generally speaking, just real quick on basically everything else, kind of as a catch-all category there, I'm really pleased as well. When it comes to DEI, gender ideology, immigration, I'm very, very happy overall with what I see from this administration thus far.
All right. Well, thank you for all that. I think that was honest ups and downs, right? Positives and negatives. But I want to talk about that plan for Gaza, or Gaza-Lago, as we're calling it. Is this real? Is it feasible? What's your analysis of Trump's thinking here?
Yeah, so I actually wrote my syndicated column on this exact topic this past week, so you can check it out at Newsweek, Los Angeles Times, Real Clear Politics, and elsewhere. So the short answer is I don't know. I'm not gonna lie to you, Jonathan, and say that I know, frankly, because I'm not entirely sure that Donald Trump actually knows. I'm not entirely sure that anyone knows exactly how serious this is. However, My read on this is twofold. One, this is Donald Trump doing what Donald Trump likes to do, which is try to bust outmoded shibboleths, basically try to take an old sclerotic orthodoxy and say, you know what, maybe we should approach this a little bit of a different way. And, Jonathan, you and I are both huge proponents of the Abraham Accords, right? And in the Abraham Accords, which I suspect we might get to a little bit later in our conversation, but that is just another example of Donald Trump really working hand in hand in tandem with Bibi Netanyahu, just shattering an old, failed, sclerotic consensus there. So for a half century, the professional two-state solution cartel, the peace processors in the Beltway and so forth there, they said the only way to get Israeli-Arab rapprochement would be the so-called inside-out approach. More territorial concessions, give up Gaza, give up Judea and Samaria, Golan Heights, Sinai, basically everywhere other than Tel Aviv, I guess, and then maybe give the Palestinians a state, and then, maybe the Saudis will then want to get peace with you. But the beauty of what Donald Trump did the first time around was he went all in for U.S.-Israel relations there. He went all in bolstering U.S. support for Israel, convincing the more moderate Arab Sunni states that Israel was not going anywhere and that U.S. support for Israel was not going anywhere. And they basically demolished the inside-out model and put this outside-in Abraham Accords model for regional peace in its place there. So my point is that he's done this before. He has shattered consensus before. I don't exactly know just how serious he is. Frankly, I have some concerns, to be honest with you. As an American, I don't necessarily want thousands and thousands of U.S. troops to be sitting ducks there in Gaza. I'm not entirely sure that is kind of in line with Donald Trump's foreign policy in general, but if it is just some sort of negotiating tactic here, if he's basically taking an argument, if he's basically trying to put out a kind of out there argument, so to speak, and then kind of settle for something else there, I could definitely see that as a possibility as well. On the question of population transfer, of trying to move some Arabs out of Gaza to Jordan and Egypt, I'm deeply, deeply pleased that he is trying to bring this back into the conversation. Jonathan, you're a student of history. I think you know that this was once actually a fairly mainstream idea. I mean, President Herbert Hoover back in the 1930s was a very outspoken proponent of population transfer. It's so chaotic, right? It's a very frenetic, kinetic situation. You have Donald Trump basically going from forcing or seemingly forcing this unfortunate ceasefire hostage deal in Israel and then kind of going full Rabbi Kahana in the span of like a week and a half. I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, obviously. It's not literally his stance. But it's a little difficult to put all the pieces together there, but I like where his head is at, and my general mentality is this guy's done this before. Let's let him cook.
Yeah, and you use the word sclerotic. That's the word I've been using to describe this Arab nationalist perspective on, Palestinians staying in territory slated for the Palestinian National Project at all costs. And right now, of course, when you talk about Gaza, it's simply unlivable. But of course, saying that out loud is what drives the Osloids crazy. And I think you're right to flag that. I want to ask you about something else. I think a more controversial policy, if we can call it that, from Trump. And that's what's happening inside the U.S. bureaucracy. Now, I'm the first to say, as a former bureaucrat in the U.S. government, it's bloated. And I mean, I heard literally in my first day at the Treasury Department years ago, this is a direct quote: "Nobody ever got in trouble in government for doing too little." That was the guidance I got from my boss, right? That's insane. But the purges in the FBI, CIA, maybe we leave USAID out of this for a minute, but I mean, I tend to think that we could be putting our own national security at risk if we're purging the agencies that are tasked with securing the United States. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm generally supportive. I mean, I think a lot of it, we have to see how it plays out. A lot of this has not actually happened yet. I mean, Kash Patel, for instance, has not actually been confirmed as FBI director yet. But I think that Donald Trump, going back, Jonathan, to his very first run for office back in 2016, I mean, there really is actually such a thing as the deep state, and specifically, there really is such a thing as the deep state. And we can quibble over the label. I'm not in love with that label either. But there is such a thing as people entrenched within, specifically the national security law enforcement agencies, who I think have a political agenda. We saw this in Operation Crossfire Hurricane back in 2016. We saw this in those text messages between those FBI agents, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, talking about a fail-safe policy, trying to throw the election, that is the FBI, to Hillary Clinton instead of Donald Trump if the American people had their druthers, and thank goodness the FBI did not succeed in that. We saw that with the FISA warrants on Trump campaign staffers, George Papadopoulos, people like that back in 2016. And then we had the whole Mueller probe on alleged Russia collusion, which basically derailed the entire first half, frankly, of the first Trump presidency. And then obviously the lawfare with special counsel Jack Smith and Merrick Garland. So Donald Trump has a lot of reasons, I think, to be very, very skeptical, very, very skeptical of the way that the DOJ, CIA, and the FBI have treated him over the years there. So I think much of the proof is going to be in the pudding. I do not think that you can literally go ahead and abolish the CIA or the FBI. The nation needs a federal law enforcement agency. I mean, Jonathan, I'm a lawyer. I clerked for a federal appeals judge down in Texas on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. I have worked on court cases involving federal prosecution for the most horrific crimes you can imagine there. So we need people who are actually tasked with prosecuting these cases there. So I'm not a burn it down kind of guy there. But I do think that the rot is systemic enough where you actually do need some large-scale changes there. And I do think that Kash Patel is the kind of guy who can bring that there. I thought that he acquitted himself quite well at his Senate confirmation hearing, and I look forward to seeing him confirm. It's worth noting that at the CIA as well, John Ratcliffe is kind of a more mainstream figure, right? I mean, unlike Kash Patel, he doesn't necessarily come from kind of MAGA world, you might say. He's not a Mar-a-Lago creature or anything like that. John Ratcliffe, former congressman from Texas there. So I think that I think that a lot of people should have less concerns about John Ratcliffe at the CIA there. So I'm generally pleased, but again, the proof is going to be in the pudding, I think, when it comes to how a lot of this ultimately plays out in real time.
Yeah, we're going to watch that one. I mean, I think reform is always a good thing. I think there's always a question of overreach, but I guess we'll see where this thing goes. All right, enough about Trump. I want to talk to you about your new book. When did you write it? Why did you write it? What's the message? Why do we all need to buy it?
Yeah, so the book is called Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. It's out March 18th, so it's available for pre-order now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you go ahead and get your books. So I started writing it probably just under a year ago, maybe last March or April or so. It's basically a post-October 7th book, Jonathan, and it's not just about the state of Israel. I want to emphasize that. That is clearly in there. I have multiple chapters on that. I have a whole chapter on the Abraham Accords and kind of my own view of foreign policy, which is kind of a national interest, realist foreign policy, and how I feel that U.S.-Israel relations not only naturally fit within that paradigm, but absolutely flourish within that paradigm. So all of that is in there. I have Jewish nationalism, Zionism. But the cover of the book and the title, I think, is instructive. The cover of the book that my agent and I chose for this is actually a cover of Moses leading the Israelites across the Red Sea. I deliberately chose, Jonathan, not to do kind of a blue and white Magen David kind of thing there, because I think of this book and I want this book to be a lot more than kind of typical pro-Israel Hasbara. This is actually a book really about the Jewish people, more so than really just the Jewish state of Israel. I basically argue in the book, Jonathan, that what we today call Western civilization actually begins with God's revelation to Moses and the Israelites at Mount Sinai. And as a lawyer, I kind of trace many of our legal norms when it comes to the English common law, constitutional structure. I talk about the philo-Semitism of the American founders, of the seminal English common law figures there. And I basically ultimately argue that in order to preserve that which we today call Western civilization, a biblically proud, biblically undergirded Jewish Christian alliance that knows what it stands for and knows what it seeks to transmit into the next generation, only that can possibly withstand the threat that we face from what I refer to as the three hegemonic forces that seek to destroy us, which are in no particular order: wokeism, Islamism, and global neoliberalism. So it's a lot in there, but that's the book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. You can pre-order it today.
Sounds like you bit off a lot there. I'm curious to see how it all comes out. All right, last question for you, and heading back to Trump, I guess. What's his plan for Israel's long-term security? I mean, Abraham Accords, neutralizing the Iranian nuclear program, lots of challenges in front of us. Where do you think we can expect Trump to go in the months ahead as it relates to the Middle East?
Well, I'm very bullish on the Saudi prospect, right? I think I would be lying to you, Jonathan, if I said that this isn't something that that the Trump folks have been thinking about for a long time. I mean, based on my sources from the first administration there, it seemed to me like Saudi normalization was basically close to a done deal by the time that first administration ended. My sources said it was a matter of 3-4 months at the most. They were basically on the 5-yard line, so to speak, to make another football analogy with the Super Bowl last night. So I think that will get done. My concern, and this is my only concern, is that I am adamant that Saudi normalization not come at the expense of giving up Judea and Samaria. That is something that I definitely have my eyes on there, and I'm slightly concerned about that, especially with someone like Steve Witkoff, who appears to kind of be a deal maker, so to speak, above all, regardless of the contents of the deal. That is where I'm a little suspect right now when it comes to that. But assuming that Israel is not giving up Judea and Samaria, and I trust Netanyahu enough to think that he will not do that, then I am optimistic about Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis joining in some capacity. The Iranian issue is where the rubber is going to meet the road there. And I don't necessarily have the best read as to how exactly this is going to play out. It seems to me like Donald Trump has been somewhat radicalized on the Iran issue, but simply by dint of the fact that they have literally tried to assassinate him. We know that because even the Biden administration has said that time and time again. We know that Iran has repeatedly sought to assassinate Donald Trump there. Does that mean that Donald Trump is going to call in the 82nd Airborne or whatever to try to start dropping bombs on Tehran? Maybe not. Does it mean that he will support an Israeli military strike if need be? And we're probably getting pretty close to that point sooner rather than later there. Yeah, I actually am optimistic that he probably would support that kind of thing there. So that's where the rubber's going to meet the road there. He's talking a lot about reaching some sort of new deal there. I'm not sure that he exactly means that, to be honest with you. As Selena Zito famously said, you take Donald Trump seriously, but not literally there. But I do think that ultimately Trump and Netanyahu will find some way where they are in agreement to deal with the Iran issue, which is probably the number one issue to deal with this term.
Number one, indeed. All right. Thank you, Josh Hammer, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD founder and president Cliff May was joined on Foreign Policy podcast by Victoria Coates, a former FDD adjunct fellow with an impressive background, including overseeing the maximum pressure campaign against Tehran and negotiating the Abraham Accords during Trump's first term. Cliff and Victoria discussed the U.S.-Israel relationship, the challenges of confronting mutual enemies, how the October 7th attack revived latent anti-Semitism in America, and her new book, The Battle for the Jewish State, How Israel and America Can Win. By the way, I wrote a review of her book for the Washington Free Beacon. If you want to check that out, it ran last week. My colleagues Mark Montgomery and John Hardy co-authored a piece for Defense One, emphasizing the need for the U.S. to maintain military support for Ukraine alongside economic sanctions on Russia. They argue that for a peace deal to become a reality, Putin must understand that Trump isn't messing around and that continued fighting will only lead to more frustration, if not misery, for Moscow. Finally, FDD senior fellow Emily de la Bruyere testified before Congress last week about Beijing's Made in 2025 plan. She highlights the CCP's use of industrial capacity to enhance its military and economic power while fostering global dependence on Chinese manufacturing. In her testimony, Emily outlined the steps America must take to hinder China's plans, beginning with leveraging our own strengths and capabilities. That's going to do it, folks. As always, I encourage you to check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Please read our quick takes on X at FDD or watch the videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. And as always, you can make that tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer saying go birds one last time and signing off for FDD.